Welcome to the 3Haunted podcast, where we bring you all things horror, supernatural, folklore, mythology, and all things that go bump in the night.
Hey guys, this is your co-host Ashley Lunar Goddess, Gorilla Girl filmmaker and horror-loving cinephile. I'm just your average pun-making swearwolf that loves to explore the spookier things in life.
Hey everybody, I'm John Thomas, paranormal investigator, super smartass, and film lover extraordinaire.
What's up, ghouls, gals, and all of my intuitive pals? In today's episode, we'll be discussing mediumship, being intuitive, sacred soul alignment, and the Akashic record. We have an amazing special guest joining us to discuss all of this and more.
But first, a word from our network sponsor.
Are you looking for more awesome podcasts? Head on over to withoutyourhead.com for access to the Without Your Head podcast network, where you'll find a variety of podcasts sure to keep you entertained and coming back for more. All right, here we go. I always trip over my words anyways. You just laugh at me. All right. Bring us back.
Bring us back. All right, welcome back, everybody. Like Ashley said, we have a special guest with us. Her name is Jillie Maria. Thank you for coming on, and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Super excited to have you on. I appreciate you responding when I had messaged the interwebs about, hey, I need people who know about this because I know nothing about it. So I for sure thought that group was just like I was going to get crickets, but I loved that I actually got responses.
Absolutely.
So tell us about yourself, Jillie Marie. You have a lot listed on your website of all your amazing gifts, so please share.
So when I look back on it now, and I actually just had family visiting this weekend and was talking about when I really realized where my gifts went, because I started myself in hardcore dedicated therapy in 2011, and because I just knew I wasn't happy, and it kind of, as I was letting go of the anger and the sadness and all the mess and the goo, I was getting more and more intuitive. And I started, having friends reach out to me for advice, and I was giving them information that was not of me. And they were like, oh my God, that's spot on. Or I would tell them, like, this is what I feel like is going to happen. And in this light of no filter, would just say what was there. And some people were not ready to receive it, lost some friends over it, had my first coaching client ever fired me because she was over it, and then later realized that I was 100% correct. And again, when you're doing mediumship and you're intuitive and whatnot, your goal is not to be in ego and be correct, quote unquote, but it's more about following what your gut is telling you, what we call in society, if someone is not intuitive, if they're just like, I use the outwardly, like if you're like a Baptist or a super religious person, we all have a gut instinct, right? Something that tells us like not to go here, not to do this, or you forgot your cup of coffee and you went back. And then when you started driving, you missed an accident. That is still your gut. That is still intuition. So when I, looking back on it now, when I realized I was intuitive and I realized I was a medium was a long time ago. I remember being at my grandma's house back when she was alive, and I was probably I was under 10. I was a little kid, and we were staying upstairs. My grandparents had a 2-story house that was like 150, 200 years old, very old house. And it was built by the town doctor. And there was a gentleman standing I was coming down the stairs one day, and there was a gentleman standing in a full suit at the bottom of the stairs. And I was like, what the hell is this? And I was terrified. I just stood there and stared at him. And the light was off to the stairway and to the upstairs. And I just stood there and stared and I heard my mom yelling at me from the kitchen, like, come on. And I walked down, and as I walked down the stairs, he disappeared. And I didn't tell anybody about it for years because I was like, they're going to think I'm crazy. Because I was raised in a very Catholic family. Like, you go to church every Sunday, you do your sacraments, you go to all those things, you go to Good Friday, you have the bread blessed, blah, 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 blah. And so that was like one of my first experiences with like, I've got gifts. I just didn't know what any word was at the time, like the word verbiage for it at the time. And then my very first that I remember was I was probably, again, I was under 10. I was probably 6 or 7 years old, maybe-ish in that area. And my dad was renting a 200-plus-year-old farmhouse in Maine. And I remember looking out the window one night, and I saw a girl in a white dress in this hayfield that had just been plowed. They had just harvested the hay. And my dad was renting this house. I knew nothing about it. I just knew that there was a lot of antiques in the house. It was a very old house. And I was told to not go in the room above the garage, which I did eventually, like years later. When I was a teenager, I went in because I was, can't resist that. And there was all kinds of antique, like 200-year-old encyclopedias and a wicker bassinet and all kinds of other stuff. But I remember looking out in that field and going like, who is that little girl? Like, why is she in the field walking around? Like, what on earth? And I remember walking down, we would go down to the lake that was behind our house a couple of miles walk the dog and whatnot. And I didn't see the little girl. And I remember asking my dad one night, like, there's a little girl that lives around here. And he goes, I really have no idea. The house next to us is rented. The lady that owns our house that we're renting is the same lady that lives in the house over there. But there's really no other houses around us. Why are you asking about a little girl? And I said, I saw a little girl out the window. And my parents just looked at it as, at the time as like, my dad and my stepmom as like, had a really fertile imagination. So that was like, and I just, kind of shoved it all under the rug, didn't really think anything of it. And then when I started doing therapy and I started healing some other stuff in my life, and I started coming into my intuition, and slowly my gifts were dropping into place. So like where I originally had been very clairvoyant as a child, I was no longer clairvoyant as much as I was clairaudient. So what that looks like in case anyone's not aware, I think your audience probably is aware, but it feels like a lot of times sounds are amplified like way beyond where they ought to be, or you hear things no one else hears. And I remember when I was coming into my clairaudience, I had signed up for, I can't remember if it was a Reiki class or an Akashic Records class, but I'd signed up for the class. And like 10 or 15 minutes later, I hear what sounds like, and I was living in an apartment at the time, a raging party outside my door. And I'm one of those people that's like, it's quiet. It's like 11 o'clock at night. Oh my God. So I'm like wanting to rage and go running outside. Long story short, there was no one out there. I look out the peephole and I'm expecting to like open the door. I'm like, I don't want to be the bitch, but this has got to calm down because it's sleepy time. And I open the door and there's nothing. You could hear a pin drop. There was nothing on the other two floors. There was nothing in the parking lot. Complete silence. You could hear crickets, but nothing else. And I'm like, what the hell? So I immediately message the person I'm taking the class from and I say, hey, I just had a really weird experience. Explain it to her. She messages me. She's like, oh my God, I was just about to go to bed. But yeah, she goes, you invested your energy, your money in this class, and it immediately ramped up your clairs. And I was like, oh gosh, okay. And I've noticed that every time that I've invested in something since, it has ramped up my clairs even more. So it's like now and the thing is too, is that my clairs have shifted. And so where I was originally in the space of clairvoyance as a child, I still get that for other people. So when you're in the Akashic Records, the Akashic Records are a different experience for everybody. And I mean, I tell, whenever I work with people who've never experienced them before, I'm like, well, the very basic is they're a record of every thought, word, and deed of your soul since its inception. That's the very basic. But, I just taught my second course in it and ended up telling people, listen, everybody's going to experience it differently. Some of you are going to see colors. Some of you are going to see letters and numbers. Some of you are going to have full-blown 3D, colorful experiences. Some of you are going to be like me, where it feels like I'm broadcasting, I'm calling a play-by-play on a sports game. So like they're showing me certain things and I'm seeing it. I'm not seeing it in the sense of like it's live and right there. I'm just telling you so I'm essentially conduiting, right? I'm straight conduiting. So like my opinion isn't in it, etc. And when I do lives on my group on Monday nights on my Facebook group, same thing. It's an introduction to the Akashic Records. It's a free opportunity to come and ask a single question, and it adapts. So my clairs adapt. So if I'm in a space where I smell, if someone is clairgust or clairalliance heavy, then I will either smell it or taste on their behalf. And it just depends. Sometimes it's like this clear as day knowing, like I can't explain to you. It's just I know. And so it just depends. And your clairs, when you're a conduit, will adapt, right? They will adapt for the person you're reading for. Because it's not about me. It's about the person I'm reading for. So when it comes to mediumship, I do it a lot a bit differently than how Teresa Caputo does. Like most people know Teresa Caputo. And they're like, well, how she does it this way, and is it real? And I'm like, well, the reality of it is if spirit is guiding you, that's a different conversation from you being in someone's energy that you chose. Because in real life, it's an energy ethics violation to be in someone's energy without their permission. So like if someone says to me like, oh, hey, can you read me? And I'm like, no, because I don't have permission to be in your energy, nor do I want it. And I'm really pretty specific with people about telling them, part of the thing with with what I call the healing arts is to say to people, listen, everyone that does it like I do is my profession. And it's sacred work, number one. Connecting with someone in terms of mediumship with a loved one, who's passed away, to me is sacred work. So it's like I've dealt with a lot of people who want to call forward, want to connect with a relative who has passed away via suicide. And I've learned a ton about suicide because of that. And it's busted through a lot of my beliefs, my judgments. And we all have judgments about it, right? Like having these conversations with people who've passed over and communicating that to their loved one who's on this side has been one of the most humble experiences of being a medium for me. It's indescribable. And it's one of those things that when you get to give someone that peace and they get to go, okay, so I didn't do it, I didn't cause it. And you get to be in the space of, no, this person just hit a point where they felt like they had no other alternative. And when you get to that space where you feel like you have no other alternative but to exit this world, I can't imagine that, the space that they're in except for what they communicate with me. And so it's an interesting thing to do that kind of mediumship work versus, for example, reading an object and getting the entire history of it from like a crystal, for example, and getting the entire history of every single person whose hands it's gone through from like where it started. Like I'll give you an example. I was in a space, probably about 2 years ago now. There's a crystal shop near where I live. And the owner said, I want to close your eyes. I want to put something in your hand. And I trust him enough to do that. So he did this. He puts this crystal in my hand. And he goes, what are you experiencing? And I saw like this whole history of this crystal to where it got to the person that sold it to him. And I was like, oh my, like I almost got knocked down because they consider those crystals to be they're not blood diamonds, but they are very precious to them. And the person who did not want them harvested, suddenly I'm taking all that energy on as an empath. And so it was like, whoa. And I sat there and and I opened my eyes immediately and just had this like moment like, oh my God. And he's like, what happened? I'm like, I felt like somebody was knocking me in the knees and like I needed to sit down. And it's a very interesting experience when you're in 3D world right here and right now in 2021 or 2022 or we're in whatever time period you're in. And you're having this experience of something that's not in the same plane. And so that's an experience as far as objects are concerned. And then
does that make that difficult for you? Like when you go to a crystal shop or let's say you go to an antique shop, does that make it difficult to just be able to experience it on a kind of just 2D interaction? Like I just want to go shopping because of all of the hands that like nothing's going to be pure, right? Like it's been touched by somebody. So does that make it really difficult or have you come to a space where you can kind of filter that out?
Well, I have come to a space where I usually, even when I go shopping now, because of everything that's happened in the world in the last like 2.5, 3 years, I've really gotten myself to a space where I bubble up and I clear and ground my energy before I even go, even like to Target or Walmart, because anything you're touching has been touched by numerous hands before it gets to you. But when I'm in a space where I just want to enjoy here and now, I'm generally set the intention that I'm like, I clear myself, I ground myself, that's just my normal practice. And then I usually will set the intention, like, I just want to be here now. So I'm usually not going to be guided to something that has energy in it that I need to deal with.
Okay.
But if I am, like, have been things like there's been antiques or like there's somebody that will come in and they will have something and someone will go, oh, what do you think of it? And I'll just be in the space of, okay. And I can isolate and like almost put the whole thing in a bubble. So it's like I can step in the bubble, do the thing, and then step out of the bubble. And I'm very intentional about, like, if I go clothes shopping as just a random example, right? I just want to be in that moment and clothes shop. I don't want to know anything about any other energy. And as an empath, like I've had to learn to really bubble and take care of my energy and protect my energy. And I've really had to get to a space where I'm a sovereign being first before I'm anything else. And I get to protect my energy. So it's not an obligation. It's not like, oh, that must be really hard. Because a lot of people, when they first come into it, are unprotected empaths. They have no idea. And a lot of people find because the healing arts really ends up under the general category of spirituality. And a lot of people that have a spiritual awakening, what they refer to as a spiritual awakening, it's because they're coming out of a religious space and they're trying to find footing. And like, I consider myself a Christian, I'm a Catholic by birth and by raising, but I'm also, now it's like I'm more in a spiritual Christian realm. And so it's like, my faith in God is solid, but I also don't push that on anybody. And I also don't go to church on a regular basis. But I'm also not going to yell at you if you go to church on a regular basis. If that works for you, cool. So it's in the space of, when you are growing into this, is I'd like to tell people, learn your body's pendulum. Learn what your yes is and what your no is in your body. Because when you're able to figure out what resonates with you, you get to be in a space where you're no longer trying to people please. You're no longer trying to fight your wounds. You're just in a space of, this works for me. This doesn't work for me. If you go into a crystal shop and it's a crystal, yay you. If you go into a crystal shop and it's a rock, because I had a hard time with that for a really long time, it's a rock and I don't get to say anything about it. Because a lot of times people will walk into the crystal shop that I go to and he doesn't market it as a metaphysical shop. So a lot of times people will come in and they'll be picking up what I call crystal babies and they'll be like, oh, this is a really pretty rock. And I'm like, no. I'm like, no. And I'm sitting there like, oh, that has the most beautiful energy. And people are like, it's a really pretty, and I watched somebody, it was like 2019. And this woman bought this absolutely gorgeous clear quartz crystal cluster. It was like $400 and it was gorgeous. It had energy for days. And I was like totally geeking out over it. She comes up, she's like, well, this is really pretty. And she goes, this is going to make a fantastic doorstop. And the owner of the shop, who's known me since like 2017, looked at my face, and I mean, I have no poker face whatsoever, and you could see the look on my face, like.
I mean,
but
her doorway is going to be very clear of negative energy. Nothing's getting through that door that's negative.
Like, oh wow, I'm like, well, she's going to have a fun time. That and like the person that bought Moldavite and didn't know anything about it. And I was like, do you have anything black at your house? Oh, no. I meant like, do you have like tourmaline? Do you have shungite? Do you have jet? Do you have smoky quartz? Anything that can also ground you while you're using your Moldavite. And she was like, no, do I need that? And I'm like, oh my God.
That's going to be an adventure for her.
I'm like, well, this is going to be fun. And I said, well, and I was like, you know what? And I remember walking over and going, you know what? I'll just buy it for you. So I grabbed a really tiny piece of black tourmaline for her, was like, which one is going to be best for me? Like, show it to me. Here. This goes in this hand. This goes in this hand. Boom. There you go.
My gift to you, my friend.
Well, that's the thing is like, when you come into it, there's a lot of times when people, and again, I was asking her, I'm like, may I gift you a grounder? And she was like, sure, great, perfect. And after she left, I was like, and it's like, I'm sorry, I probably overstepped there, but I didn't want her to get home with this piece of Moldavite that is as powerful as that one is and have her being like, woo! And she can't figure out what the hell she's doing.
Why her world's being rocked.
Right? And literally, and you're like, oh my God. And then she's like having all kinds of crazy issues with life. And it's because there was somebody, I was there, it's been like 3 weeks since the last time I was there. But the last time I was there, the owner said that right before the shop closed for an event, he said there was someone that he's like, yeah, there's a woman that bought a piece of Moldavite and she returned it and we gave her store credit because she was like screaming at us and saying her whole life fell apart. And I'm like, well, did no one tell her how it works? Did no one share this with her?
So you said when you were living at the farmhouse, you had seen the little girl and there was a lot of antiques in the barn. Do you think, given your experience with objects, that might have been where she was connected with all of that? Or do you think that was something separate?
It was something separate.
Okay.
I did not get a connection that she ever lived there. Like I still to this day Oh, actually, it's really interesting. As I'm talking to you, I'm getting what the whole connection is, which is really interesting. So she is the woman who owned both houses as a little girl.
Who's still alive, right?
I don't know if that woman is still alive, to be
No,
very honest.
was still alive.
Yes. Yeah, at the time, yes. And what they're sharing me is that there was a house fire of some variety, and she was running away from it, and she was told if there was ever a fire to run into the field. And it's funny because as I'm thinking about it, there was also on the left-hand side of the house, there was like what looked like 3 stalls for horses. There was no horses anywhere in the area that I'm aware of. I never saw any horses, let me put it that way. But it's interesting. Again, it's interesting how those things come through. But it was one of those things where what she had in her house, it wasn't particularly protected. But it was like the thing that when I remember seeing these objects and being like, wow, if I was in that space, they were to me representations of opulent wealth. And it feels like, again, like you're in the space of like you own this one house that feels like because it's got all these antiques in it, it's your property. And you buy another house adjacent simply because you can, basically, which is a lot of people did that. A lot of people had multiple houses and whatnot 200 years ago simply because they could. But no, it was just really interesting to me that, like trying to be in the space of like, and I remember trying to see it like when we would go down to the beach and we go in the boat during the day, and I would look over, and I always wanted to go over to the stables and like put my hands on them and like really search for the little girl was what I had wanted to do as a kid. But it was like my parents are going to think I'm crazy, or than they already do.
So was she alive at the time when you were seeing the younger representation of herself, or had she already passed?
The woman who owned both the houses was alive at that time.
Oh, wow. So you were seeing a younger representation. What would that be? Like an echo of a moment in time, or?
It generally would look like trauma. Trying to get out. Like a lot of times, like you'll see, I'll give you another example. When I was in New Orleans years ago, it was after Katrina had happened, and they had lost hundreds and hundreds of people. But they also had, because New Orleans is below sea level, a lot of the way that they bury people is in crypts, above sea level. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people had effectively risen up out of graves. It's gross, but that's how it is. And so it's one of those things where I remember like feeling like when I went to visit, and I remember like I felt like I was bumping into people constantly. And I couldn't, I wasn't in my gifts at the time to say, I feel like I'm bumping into people as a constant. And one of my friends that had been visiting with us, was staying with us, said, is this really hard? And I said, yeah, it can be. And at that time, I didn't know really how to control it. I just was in complete awe of the situation. But I also didn't realize at the time that I had the power to be like, okay, I'm not doing this right now. Like I do now, like, when I connect, when I talk about it, when I'm allowing myself to do a mediumship session, I'm doing it and then I close off the energy for everybody. So it's like if I'm doing a mediumship session, some people will be open as empaths or as mediums to crossing people. I'm like, listen, I could be crossing people 24/7. But the reality of it is it's not my job and it's not my prerogative. And so we all get to be sovereign human beings, right? And we get to make the decision, where is my energy best spent? And so being in that space, like me going over, like I'll just give you another example. I was on St. John, U.S. Virgin Islands, again. Actually, was the first time that I went. Yeah, the first time that I went in 2016, and before the hurricanes came through. And I'm standing on this ground that used to be a sugar cane plantation, and it used to be a rum factory, and all of that was run by enslaved persons. And the heads of those plantations were Dutch people, and the Dutch were known historically to be among the most cruel to their enslaved persons. And so I'm standing in this, and I knew at that point that I was in my gifts, and I was standing in these ruins and just in awe of just like absorbing the history and, whatever, and just really taking it in. I felt this woman grab my hand. Couldn't see her, just felt this tug like, you need to come with me. So I was walking, just following wherever she was going. There was a little tiny sign that was like, no trespassing, don't walk on the ruins, blah, blah, blah. And I walk up the stairs, and there really isn't any place to really walk on the ruins, if you will, because most of it's grassy. And so you can't really climb much you wouldn't want to climb. It would be because of how they made cement with a lot of shells, and a lot of it was broken and whatever. So it's not like anything you would want to climb on anyway. And she's showing me, and again, I can't see a human being. I'm just going by what I'm getting intuitively. she's showing me how they made alcohol mash back in the day, like how they took sugar cane and crushed the cane itself, got the liquid out of it, and then mashed it into whatever they needed to be. So whether it was becoming granulated sugar or brown sugar or alcohol mash, or whether it was just sugar mash for something else, for other uses that they use it for. And then she was telling these other people that were enslaved there, like, she can help us, she can clear us. Like, they were stuck. Because part of what happens in older homes and like plantations and whatnot is a lot of times those spirits don't know any other life other than where they lived. And so they get stuck there. I would always be in the assumption that, okay, this area is like 300 years old. We've been out of slavery. Surely somebody else has been down here. And in that case, either someone was and didn't choose to be in their mediumship skills and didn't choose to do it, which is, again, totally fine, obviously. But I'm in this space and I just start closing my eyes and just getting this notion. And she's like telling all these people, like, she can help us, she can help us. And in that case, like, I was seeing these workers, like, I had my eyes closed and I was seeing these men, like, turning the mash and like with these, like, all of a sudden, I mean, it was hot, it's tropical weather, but it's also felt like exceptionally that hot, couple hundred degrees of like, you're in these fires that are going 24 hours a day and you're in this brick building and all the things. And it was like, she was like telling them she can help us, and then like to trust me, and then also asking me, can you help me? And I'm, like, what do you want me to do? What do you need me to do? And opening myself, because again, like you said earlier about the antiques, in this case, I was choosing to open myself up as a conduit and saying, okay, what can I do? And it was like, we just want to be cleared out of this space. We want to go to wherever we need to go. Because like, this is not, like, she was like, this is not a life. And so I ended up, doing my process of walking them through, like, is there anything you want to say? And then clearing them. Because there was nothing, they hadn't done anything wrong, where if you have like a benevolent, like if I do work with somebody and they have, as a contrast, if you're in a space where you're working with somebody who has an entity attached to them, as an example, or something that's what I like to call a wayward, like someone that doesn't belong in their energy, etc., that's a slightly different clearing process than it is to just be like, I don't want to be here anymore. Can you send me over there? So I ended up sending them over there.
It sounds like there's a level of consent. They're asking you for help versus someone who's got something attached to them that doesn't want to let go.
Correct. And as
there's
long
not consent.
Correct. And as long as you have like, a lot of times I would say to people, have you been in a space where that was 150 or more years old, to start to pinpoint where they were? Like, it was, because where I live in central North Carolina, it's close to Virginia, and between North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina, there was a lot of plantations. There was a lot of Civil War activity. And so there's a lot of houses that were used as hospitals. And so there was a lot of death and a lot of stuff that happened that no one has ever cleared, whether it's because nobody cares or the family that was living there doesn't understand it, doesn't even know it needs to be done, etc., right? And so when you're in the space of a loved one who's passed away, or someone, even not a loved one, but, like in the case of the plantation, having somebody saying, oh, thank God you're here, you can help us. I'm like, oh my God, she can see me. On some level, she knows I'm here. Okay. And you're literally being transported back 150, 200 years, except you're right in where you were in 2016 at the same time. And it's a humbling experience. And when I realized I had that gift, I kind of had a moment of like, oh, wow. And like, I finish, I do the thing, I clear everybody that wants to be cleared. The energy feels completely different in the space that I'm in. And she was like, thank you so much. And asked to be, like, she was the last one to be cleared. And I cleared 16 people that day and sent them on their merry way. So their energy was no longer in that space. When, like, my stepdad, all of a sudden I heard my stepdad like yelling for me, like, hey, where are you? And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like, I'm right here. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I was just enjoying the scenery. And because at the time I was like, I don't even know how I would explain, and I may have explained it, but I don't think I did, what happened, what I experienced. And, part of the thing too is realizing who can, like, my mom and my stepdad know that I'm a medium and they know what I do, and I've explained it to them, and, they've shared things with me and whatnot. And I've shared things with them, and they're accepting of it. And then my dad is like, knows what I do, but has zero interest. And again, either way, it's totally okay.
So have you been able, especially since you came from a family that has a Catholic background, have you been able to help them reconcile that having these gifts does not equal opposite of what they believe. Because I think that's what we see a lot is like people automatically associate it with like witchcraft or, something that is antithesis to Christianity or Catholicism or any of those other religions out there. Have you been able to maybe help people see that they don't have to be against one another?
Correct. Yes. I would say my mom and I more so, because I would consider my mother, when she hears us, I think she would, she'll probably kind of laugh, but I consider her to be very Catholic. I mean, she goes to church a couple days a week and does all the sacraments and does all, and whatever. And that's, I love that for her. And she's kind of gotten into a space where it's like, it's me. I'm not a different person. And I'm not, and the thing is too, is part of it is really largely about intention. It's largely about intention, because if you're in a space, like people are like, oh, do you play with Ouija boards? I'm like, yeah, no. I'm like, if you don't know what you're doing, you can get yourself into a really bad space. If you don't know like how to use a Ouija board, if you don't know how to protect your energy, if you don't know how to be in a space where it's like everything is done from a space of highest and best good for everybody involved and from a space of love. That's where I do things from. That's where I work from. So, because there's definitely like, it's just like hackers. There's white hack and there's white hat hackers, which are the good guys. And there's black hat hackers, who are the bad guys, who try to steal your stuff and why you need LifeLock, things like that. But then there's, the people that hack themselves to see where the gaps are. And so at the same time, I guess you'd call it white witchcraft. I don't identify as a witch, but at the same time, I know a lot of people do, and that's cool. Whatever works for you, works for you. But again, it's from a space of intentionality. And so when I'm in a space of like, I'm not trying to do anything, I'm not trying to goad people. There's a lot of people out there who do things for the reaction, for the likes, for the views on, TikTok or whatever. And they say outrageous things and whatever. And I'm like, you know what? I have the utmost respect for the people who've passed away, for the work that I get to do, for the conduit that I get to be. And so being in a space where it's like, listen, I pull tarot cards. I'm in the Akashic record. I live in the Akashic records. I run sacred soul alignments. I do the work that I do. I'm a medium. I talk to dead people. I talk to houses. I talk to objects. And if people think that there's always going to be people out there who think you're crazy, no matter what you do. But it's honestly, and I tell people, I'm like, if you thought I was crazy when I was a Spartan, if you thought I was crazy when I was a Red Sox fan, which I still am, if you thought I was crazy when I did all these things, when I was following 5 sports at the same time, this is just a different type of crazy. And the way that I look at it is I invite people to be in the space of, what helps is they know me. Like my mom has known me since I was born, right? So it's like she knows me well enough to know where it's like, I was terrified of her finding out that I was a medium, to be very honest with you. I was like, oh my God, are my parents going to disown me when they find out that I do this and this and this? And that at one point was a legitimate fear. And then I was like, listen, you know what? Here's the deal. And it was like, I'm going to therapy. And then it was like, I'm studying the Akashic records. I'm studying Reiki. I'm doing these things. Yeah, I'm running sacred soul alignments and this is what I do. And it was like, oh, okay. And so it's like, I think part of it is that we don't change in a negative way, right? So if you're in a space where you are like, if you're wrapped, like I'll just give you an extreme example. If you're in a space where, like, for example, you get wrapped up in a cult, that is going to negatively impact you. If you're in a space where someone does, and I don't even go into the space, so I can't speak in it with any kind of expertise to it, but I have worked with clients who've been in like mind control situations, like extreme gaslighting, like super narcissistic situations. That is going to rip you up. That is going to cause you to be in a space where you need, really to go back and do the hard work of therapy. Being in a space where it's like, yeah, I do this work. I'm in the Akashic records. The Akashic records are meant to give you clarity. So your guides want the highest and best good for you. And so if you're in a space where, for example, someone's like, oh, let's play with a Ouija board, I'm like, let's not. Because you don't know what you're dealing with. And if you're not protecting your energy, and if you're not coming from a space of, love, I hate to be, this is so cliche, but if you're not coming from a space of love and highest pure light, you probably have gaps in your energy, and you probably will allow something into your energy that doesn't belong there.
You're bringing back what you're putting out. So
yes. And a lot of times if people are like, ha-ha, and they think they're going to go do something like, they're going to be slick or whatever. And I'm like, why would you do that? Like, why would you invite that forward? Why would you do that? And I'm like, I'm like, if you're in a space where it's like, well, what do you do? I'm like, well, first of all, you protect your energy so it can't get in. But again, that goes into a whole boundaries conversation about like whether you want to be boundaries or you're just trying to be in a space of like doing stuff for kicks and giggles. Because,
Well, I
the
think a
work.
lot of it comes from belief. Like, I think a lot of
Yes.
people that are using these things to, like, let's summon a demon, he. I don't think they actually believe it's going to happen. So then it's a shock when something bad does happen. And because to them, like you said, it's a giggle, it's a thrill of flirting with danger. And it's like, well, that's not real. And so they do it. But the reality of it for me is if someone has, like, all it takes, I think, is a little bit of belief and attaching your energy to it to
Mm-hmm.
actually bring back what you're ringing out. And, to your point, some people might find it crazy. What I feel is sad are the people that believe it blindly. The other night I was scrolling through TikTok. I just did like tarot reading just to see what's happening on TikTok. I counted at least 30 different people doing live streams of tarot, and they're just pulling cards. They're not talking to people. They're not building any kind of like connection, which I'm not a tarot reader, so I don't know what you need to read for somebody. But I know that probably if I have a deck of cards in front of me and I'm reading text message questions and just grabbing the top card, nope, my card says no. Yep, my card says yes. Like, to me, that almost feels like, hey, I can do that with a magic 8 ball too. I'll shake it up and answer your questions because I really don't know who you are and I really don't know what you're going through. And that's what it felt like to me as I'm watching some of these. And it's all the same, right? Like, they're all the same. Nope, my card says no. And it's like, well, I don't answer love questions unless you buy my love package, my soulmate package, but I'll answer yes or no questions. Yep. Nope. Sorry, sweetie. It doesn't say that. Nope. And they're just flipping through card after card after card. And I'm like, you don't know who these people are. So what's the assumption here? But it's this blind faith. These people feel lost or they're searching and they're reaching out to whatever answer they can get. And for me, I'm just like, you know what? Spare yourself. Go get the magic 8 ball. Shake it up. It'll give you the same random answer. Like,
Well,
I
and
don't
the
know.
thing is too is there's so much desperation around it too. Is if you're in a space where, and there are a lot of people out there who, like, a lot of clients will come to me and they'll say, like, I have 900 some odd people in my group, and there's a lot of times when people will come and they'll be this, it's like the people that are interacting, and to me, it's so imperative, especially if I'm going to go into coaching you. I want the relationship. It's imperative to me because, like you said, there's so many people out there who are like, oh, doing live streams and and they're just like, and I'm like, they're not even shuffling. And I've seen people who are like, oh, well, if you want to go to the top of my list and you want a guaranteed answer, Venmo me $10. If you want to be, that you're going to be into this, Venmo me $5. If you want a private reading, Venmo me this. And it's like, wow, what about just doing a solid, straight up, let people get to know you and connect with your energy? And I end up telling people, listen, if you're on any kind of live, you are giving someone permission to be in your energy. It is imperative that you know that person, that you feel free to scroll past people you don't know from Adam's house cat. And it's also imperative that when you're finished, you close off and cleanse your own energy. Cause like when I do an Akashic Records live in my group, right? I finish the reading, I get off, I get off the live and I clear and cleanse my energy. So I return all of their energy to them and I take all of my energy back and I close the doors. And I also make sure that I close the doors to their Akashic Records as well. And again, it's energetic, but it's one of those things that's really important, especially with people who have no boundaries, to enforce them for them and be like, listen, because that's the thing is a lot of times what you see on TikTok and people scrolling or whatever is they're just blindly like, does he love me? And it's like, if you're asking that question, you already know the answer to that question.
And it's dangerous. Like, I saw a lot of them are mostly love questions. Will he come back to me? Will they, and how I don't even know how careless. Like, how careless, right? That someone hasn't shuffled their cards and they're just picking from the top and they're like, no, he's not. Or yes, he will. And it's just like, whoa, that's a lot of weight you're carrying on a card you just flipped, not knowing who that person is. Because most of the times it's like skater boy BOI number 327 asked this. And yep, he's coming back. And it just, I don't know. To me, I'm just like, that's such a careless way to handle human beings. That doesn't mean I think all tarot reading is that way. It just those lives that my energy gets prickly. And
Well,
I'm
that's
just
and
like,
that's the thing is
oh.
that's your intuition, right? Saying like, oh my God, like there's a lot of things that I will see in groups, some of the groups that I'm in where it's like, I have never seen this person. Like there's 2 or 3 groups that I'm interactive with on Facebook on a daily basis besides my own that I like. I know who the people are. I know what they're, what's going on or whatever. And I will see people that I've never seen before. And I'm like, build relationships much before you throw an offer out. Like someone's like, oh, hey, I'm going to be in your energy. And I have had to say to a few people privately that I know that I see, popping a question. I'm like, I'm not trying to tell you how to run your life, but listen, do you know this person from Adam? Because if you don't and you're letting them in your energy, you have no idea what they're doing. And then you're like, I've had people come to me and say, I was having a really good day. And then all of a sudden I felt really crappy. And I'm like, well, what or who were you around? Because if people are in a space where they're like, they're just shuffling, right? And they're like, and I'm like, what, when you know a good tarot reader, they're the person who's shuffling the deck and they're like, what does, Jillie Maria most need to know for her best and highest good? And they're shuffling. They tap the deck. They pull it to knock the deck and put the energy through it. And they pull a card. And like sometimes they'll pull a card from the middle of and that's when you're using your intuition truly and being like, here's the deal. This is the card. And they can explain it. When it's like yes or no, and it's like yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And I'm like, dude, no. But you have so many people, again, who are going to whip out a Ouija board with zero conversation beforehand without knowing like how to ground and protect the energy of it and whatever. And they're like, well, if I wanted to use a Ouija board, would you teach me how to do it? I'm like, I will teach you how to ground your energy. I'm not touching the whole thing with a 10-foot pole, but I will teach you how to ground and protect your energy in advance of doing it so that whatever you call in is for the best and highest good of all involved.
See, she's the first guest that sounds like me. I am not touching it.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. Like Ashley won't touch one. I have one. I found one in my closet, and I know that it was my aunt's, my mom's, whatever. But I cleansed it, obviously, and myself, and I haven't really messed with it. But I do know how to ground myself and cleanse and
Yep.
put forth that good intention. But with the Akashic record, I kind of have a question. I've noticed that most people that can go and do all of that mainly work or mostly work with females. Is there a reason, or just guys not into it, or because I'm curious about anything and everything with all of this stuff, so I just was kind of wondering. I've noticed that most of the people that I've seen say mostly works with females and blah 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 blah.
Their
So
customers tend to be mostly a female basis.
right.
I would say that probably 99.9% of my clients are female. I do have I've had a couple male clients. I think that spirituality tends to be, here's the thing. I think that spirituality and the healing arts touches women more than men because I feel like, again, we're still in the space where men are not allowed to talk about their trauma. Men are not allowed to talk about emotion. Men are not allowed to be in a space yet. And it's not, and again, it's a society thing, right? Where we're just now coming into a space of like, hey, we have all these really traumatic, horrible things happening in the world. When are we going to teach men that it's okay, that they don't have to, being a manly man is not chin up, shoulders back, chest out. Feel your fucking emotions. Right. If you feel angry, just sit there and be like, oh, I'm so angry. Oh my God. Feel that emotion. Let yourself cry. Like, friends of mine, as an example, a couple of years ago had a miscarriage. And the guy reached out to me and he was like, I'm devastated. I don't know what to do. And I said, can I make a suggestion to you? Because that's what I'm looking for. That's why I reached out to you, because I knew you'd have a good suggestion. I said, get in your car, go into a Walmart parking lot, put it in park. Turn up music so it looks like you're just jamming out in the back of the parking lot. You might even want to do it at night because no one's going to bother you. And I want you to scream until your voice is raw or until you are sobbing in tears, whichever comes first.
You know how many male friends of mine I've given that advice to? Not about the Walmart, but go into your car and scream. Mm-hmm. Right. Just beat up your steering wheel if you have to and scream, because you're right. They hold on so much and swallow it down. And it's like the best thing you can do for yourself
is to move the energy through you.
Yep. Right. Get it out.
Yep.
I know.
And I think that's the thing.
Yeah, there's been plenty of times when I felt like sad or overwhelmed with stuff that I'll be in the shower and I just let it. I'm like, you know what? I'm already in the shower. I'm already wet. Let's just cry. Let's get the shit out. Let's just go.
You get the acoustics too, like rah.
Fuck yeah.
and that's the thing is like I think the thing is men tend to one, not be terribly familiar with the healing arts as a whole, but, the Akashic Records specifically. And one of the things too is people that are new to them are always afraid of what they're going to hear. And I always tell people, just because you go in the Akashic Records, it's not like if you open a hot oven and like all that heat comes out at your face. When you go into the Akashic Records, you get to ask, like, your guides are not going to be like, oh, hey, remember that time when you blah, blah, blah in 1987? Or remember that time when you got really drunk and da-da. No. The thing with the Akashic Records is if you want clarity from them, is you're going in with intentionality, number one, and you're going in with specific questions. So like, what can my guide share with me about this situation? What can my guide share with me about why I seem stuck with this? Or can my guides clarify for me why I'm terrified of leaving this job and taking this other job that's a massive opportunity? Or what is my next step with so-and-so? So those specific questions, and a lot of the times, I'll have guys that will say, I don't really believe in this, but you had me curious, so I took you up on the offer, right? And a lot of people in general are afraid. They're just, and again, part of that, like you said earlier, is religiosity, is the space of, oh my God, what am I going to hear? And it's like, here's the thing. If you're that afraid of hearing it, you already know the answer. Deep down in your heart, you already know the answer to the question. And I always tell people, whenever I do podcasts, I always say, if you want a free reading, I'll be happy to give you 1 or 2 question reading, because it's a really good way to demonstrate and say, hey, does this resonate with you and whatnot? Because I don't just, spout off. I'm saying, this is what I'm getting for you. Let me know if it resonates, because there have been readings that I've done in the past where the energy's off. I did a reading probably 3 years ago now, and there was a woman on that was a disruptor. She was a member of my group, but she was just like, she was making comments to people, and I do my due diligence as far as letting people in, but there's sometimes you just don't know. She was making all kinds of comments. So people in my group that I couldn't see the comments all the way down because I was going one to the next and coming in, answering the question, being in their records, coming back out to the questions. It was one of those things where I was like, you know what? I finally had to stop everything and be like, hold on just a second. Let me clear out, step out of the Akashic Records entirely, clear the energy, and come back in again. And you need to stop commenting. Like, I'm not the kind of person normally that calls people out, but I was like, listen, if this is not your tea, this is not your tea, and that's okay. If you're a Jack and Coke person and you're not a tea person, totally okay. But this is the wrong space for you to be digging. And people after the fact, like, I had 20 messages. I was like, what the hell? So I get off and I go check my messages, and I had like all these people that are in my group members, and they're like, I'm so sorry. I tried to make her shut up. And I'm like, no, it's okay. I didn't take any of it personally. She came into the space. She needed to get her little thing out. She did her thing, and she's gone now. She's been removed from the group. She's been blocked. It's good. A lot of times with the Akashic Records, again, like you said earlier, it's a lot of people have religious upbringings that tell them that the Akashic Records, tarot cards, crystals, anything that looks like divination, a direct connection to God, creator, source, is bad, evil, whatever. And the reality of the situation is, and I've told people before, I'm like, okay, so you're telling me that you're only allowed to connect with God through a priest in church. So why then do you have a crucifix at your house? Why then do you pray in your car, in your home, when you're tending the field, when you're doing when you're at the gym, wherever you are? Why do you pray any place but church if you believe the only place you can connect with God is church? And a lot of times people will stop and go, well, wait a minute. I'm like, you told me that you go to church to connect with God.
Well, and it depends too on the religion, because, we think
Correct.
about mediumship and we see examples of that, whether they want to call it that or not.
Correct.
In certain churches where, the speaking in tongues happens and
Yes.
feeling of the spirit takes over.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're using different words, but
correct, for the same thing.
It's very similar. So I did find it interesting. You both mentioned this aspect. I think, yes, the religion does have a part to play in it when it comes to men not diving into the metaphysical world as much as women, I think, or being clients. I also think, too, just societally, men are trained to swallow everything down and to be able to channel and to be able to connect and to be intuitive. You can't be blocked up. Your energy really does need to be flowing and healing, right? So if they are trained and conditioned to just swallow it down, it's kind of stomping down their beautiful gifts.
100%. And I think too, the thing too is that happens a lot of times is that, it goes into what you said about society is like, suck it up, buttercup. And I sit here saying to people, all day long, we don't have a violence problem because of guns. We have a violence problem because we refuse to feel our emotions. And when people get to a point where they're using a weapon, they've hit a break point. And instead of being in the space of teaching, and our society actively shames men away from feeling emotions. I tell people all the time, the sad thing is, we're in the space of like, they want people to, I see these huge mental health campaigns, right? Where they want people to, reach out and, get mental health help and blah, 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 and whatever. But then it's like, oh, no, you're doing it wrong. Like, we can't feel our emotions. And it's like, oh, or they tell men that if they feel emotions, they're babies or they're girls or they're feminine or whatever. And it's like, emotion is just energy in motion. It isn't feminine. It isn't masculine. We are all emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, energetic beings. Every single one of us, no matter your genitalia, it doesn't matter. You feel emotions and I tell people all the time, when someone dies, I'm like, did you grieve? And they look at me like, well, it happened 10 years ago. I go, that's not what I asked you. Did you grieve? Did you allow yourself to feel, especially men, like statistically, 90% of men remarry within 2 years of their wife passing away. Like they get to a space where they feel a little bit of it, they grieve. And then when everybody else decides at the 3-month mark that they should be moving on, they numb it out. And they go and they find usually somebody 10 or 15 years younger than them, a shiny object, and they get remarried. And they're like saying all the right words. They know how to chase. They know how to play the game. But when it comes to feeling that deep grief and that anger and that sadness, they haven't touched it. And so often one of the misnomers, like you said earlier about, the Akashic records, is that people will say, oh, well, I'm afraid of going into them because I'm afraid of blah, 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 and whatever, because they've heard things. And I'm like, listen, you will only ever go in your healing journey in the records as far as you, one, feel safe to go, and two, as far as you allow yourself to capture. So if you're in a space where all you want to do is general questions, like Ashley saying, hey, I'd like my guides to share with me where I think this podcast is going to go. They're going to meet you where you are. They're going to meet you exactly where you are. So if you're in a space where you're not ready to find out that this and this and this is going to happen, they're going to share it with you. If you're in a space where you can't hear something, they're not going to share. They're going to meet you exactly, your guides are going to meet you exactly where you are in your journey. And the thing is they may share something with you where you're like, okay. And then 3 to 6 months later, you're like, oh shit, that makes perfect sense. Like, damn, right? That happens. But the biggest misnomer is that people are terrified of what they're going to hear. They're scared of that event that they don't want to talk about, that they have so much shame around being exposed. Like there was someone that was like, I was wondering if I did an Akashic record session, are we going to have to talk about it? I go, you don't have to talk about anything. You're the one that leads the session asking the questions. So now there might be something that comes up where it's like, hey, did you ever experience this? Because I'm getting a notion around this. Does that resonate with you? So it's like if I say to someone, does that resonate with you? Does it make sense to you? And they go, no. I'm like, okay, let's go a layer deeper. Because again, all of our experiences are layered. And so it's one of those things like when I tell people, when you heal a trauma, you're going to peel off layers of the onion. So it's not, you're just not going to chop the onion open and boom, done. And no, you wouldn't want to. And so when you're in your Akashic records with things, some people, we do deep work. Some people, like with my program clients, because again, we build that relationship that you were talking about earlier. So they're not just telling their whole life story to someone they just met off the street. They're telling, they're going through in layer by layer, and we're peeling it. And we're like, okay, while we're in that little space, let's explore it. And I tell people, it's like, if you go into a nice hotel room and you're walking through it and you go in the bathroom and you're like, oh, what's in here? And you're like, looking at the shower and how the shower works, and you're like opening up things and looking and smelling the soap and doing whatever, and then going to the next room and seeing what the condiments are and what they left you for food and whatever. And you're going around to the different spaces. Some people are going to do the walk around the hotel room, right? Where they're going to come in, they got the big picture. And then there's some people who come in and they want all the little details. And like, okay, I got to unpack my suitcase entirely before I go anywhere. And then I need to test the bed, and everybody's a little different. And the Akashic records are the exact same way. So I always tell people, I'm like, listen, we're only going to go as deep as you want to go and as deep as you feel called to go.
So what aspect of the gifts does the sacred soul alignment pertain to? Like, how does that work?
Okay, so sacred soul alignment is a modality that was created and downloaded, channeled by my dear friend and my also my spiritual teacher, Alicia Hartzell. She created it. She is it is ever growing. And the thing with sacred soul alignment is you don't have to necessarily be in your gifts to use them. So you can come in and you can be completely new to this whole thing, spirituality, the healing arts, all of it. And coming into the space of allowing yourself to connect with Gaia, connect with the heart of creation, God, creator, universe, whatever verbiage you give to it. And then the thing is its intention. So when you're calling in, when you're in alignment is an energy packet. So I like to give people a visual. It's like if you remember we had Kool-Aid packets when we were little kids, and you would like shake it and you would tear it open and you would dump the Kool-Aid into the pitcher, and then you either put sugar into it, water into it, whatever rocks your world. So what a sacred soul alignment is it's a packet of energy. So it's either calling in energy to create something like, for example, manifesting abundance. And that's going to clear out like all the stuff that's in the way of your manifesting abundance. So it's not just going to suddenly like break open the ceiling and $1 million falls through. That's not how it works. But the essence of it is if we can't receive something, if something is not working for us, we've got something in the way of us getting there. Whether it's a wound, whether it's a belief, whether it's a habit, whether it's self-sabotage, whatever it might be, there's something there that's disallowing us to receive. So then you're in the space of like, if you're calling in a sacred soul alignment to remove something like confusion, overwhelm, is it's going to bring in and dissolve and bring to the surface all the things where you're feeling confusion, overwhelm, or fear, or whatever. So they do two different things. So one, they're calling in the good stuff, and two, they're surfacing and removing the stuff that doesn't serve you.
So is this done by the individual, or it's done by a person that's helping them? I'm certified in level 1 and level 2 Akashic or sacred soul alignment rather. So that means that I can connect somebody and then I can run alignments for them. Okay.
And so it's no one yet is there's no thing where, like with the Akashic records, you can be certified and you can teach, and you can also be a practitioner. While it's not required to be, like there's a lot of people that go on that go on YouTube and get themselves in trouble going to the Akashic records because they have no idea what the hell they're doing. And they go, oh, I went and read this book and I went in the Akashic records and then I had all these things and it was really confusing and da-da-da. But it's like, again, like you said earlier about just pulling cards randomly. It's all intention is what it comes down to. It comes down to intention, number one. And number two, it comes down to allowing yourself to follow your intuition. And again, if you're ever on like a thing or you're on TikTok and there's someone just randomly pulling cards like they're having a card confetti, you probably don't want to let that person in your energy. You probably don't even want to say, hey, whatever. You probably just want to scroll right on past that. I think a mistake we all make at some points in time, especially if you're brand new and everything is a shiny object. We all come in and we're like, oh, I can ask a question. And, and we don't take seriously how imperative it is to trust and have that relationship with people. And I always tell people, follow people for a while. I don't want you to trust me off the bat. I want you to come in. I want you to be skeptical. I want you to ask questions. I want you to be like, does what she said resonate with me, or does she feel like I'm full of shit? I want you to please be skeptical, because every crystal is not for you. Every modality is not for you. Every person that's a reader, practitioner is not for you. And that's completely okay. And again, a lot of times when people get certified in various modalities, I tell people, you can't be standing in a bucket and lift the bucket at the same time. And so the reality of it is that one of the things, like I tell people, I'm like, I wish there was a healer in every home. A healer is just a space holder. And like, what is a master healer? I'm like, a master healer is a person that can hold space for a certain number of people or more. It's like, okay. And I'm like, and the thing is, I'm like, they make it safe for you to be in your gifts, in your space. Like, so yes, I have sacred soul alignments. Yes, I have the Akashic records. Yes, I have intuition. Yes, I have all these things, Reiki and things that I bring to the table. And I make it so that I create the sacred space, the container, for you to go, oh, wow. Like, and come into your gifts and feel your anger, feel your sadness, feel your shame. Because here's the thing, your happiness, your intuition is not over there. I'm not holding on to your happiness. I'm not responsible for your happiness. You are. Your happiness, your joy, your intuitive gifts were born with you. They are underneath all your shit. So part of the reason why you had asked the question earlier about how men don't connect as well emotionally and there not as many men in the field is because we don't have a lot of men that, again, like you said, society tells us manly men don't feel their emotions. And again, that doesn't necessarily need to mean that you're like and sobbing every 5 seconds. It doesn't mean you need to be like, oh my God, the Christmas Folger commercial, you need to be sobbing your eyes out and getting, 10 tissue cry or whatever. It does mean that you get to be in a space of, I'm feeling angry. I'm experiencing, and I tell people, you're not saying I am angry because you're not embodying the emotion. You're saying I'm experiencing anger, sadness, frustration, guilt, grief, shame. Because if you experience it, it can move through you without becoming part of you. So it doesn't stick to you. It's like if you're in the ocean, you're not the ocean. You're in the ocean. You walk out of the ocean, you wash the water and the sand off your feet, and you're a human being still.
Yeah, I agree. Letting that energy, the emotional energy, like you said, it's energy, right? And just letting that energy flow.
Yep.
So that one, we don't fester and dwell on it and it explodes and becomes this like explosive agent within us, but just acknowledging it in that moment so that it can process out.
Correct. And that's, it's really so important too, because a lot of times like people will come to me and they'll be like, so tell me about this whole sacred soul alignment thing. And I'll tell them, like, well, tell me about the Akashic records. And they'll say, well, how long is this going to take? If I do a program with you, how long is it going to take me to heal? And I'm like, that is a person by person experience. So if you're in a space where you have 30 years worth of trauma, you're not going to heal it in one 1 hour session, nor in reality, because you have to live the other 6 days and 23 hours in the week. You don't want to, because your body's going to need to process that work that you do. Your body also needs to process that once you finish the session, which can look like crying. It can look like peeing. It can look like passing gas. It can look like burping. It can look like sneezing a lot. It can look like a lot of different things. And people don't realize that. And it's like a lot of times too, I'll tell clients, I'm like, one of the things you'll see me doing a lot when I'm doing energy work is yawning. And they're like, am I keeping you awake? I'm like, no, I'm moving energy for you. And then sometimes people will go, oh my God. I'm like, well, you're doing it yourself too. And they'll be like, God, I'm just like, I'm burping. I can't stop burping. And I'm like, no, that's good. You're moving energy. That's how your body is choosing to, like one of the things a little fun fact about me is that I move rage out of my body with hives.
That physical manifestation.
Yep. And the first time that happened, it sucked and scared the hell out of me.
Holy moly. This has been really cool, Jillie. Like, I feel like we've gone over so much and learned so much. And I love your perspective on it. And I love that, oftentimes we have a similar background of people who have gifts. And I love getting fresh perspectives, especially because some of our listeners do come from a religious background. So it's nice to hear you speak to that and that these things aren't, quote unquote evil or anything like that. Like you're able to help kind of reconcile those things that we do have people question on, because it can be a question of faith to some people, and it doesn't have to be, right? It doesn't have to be that crisis. It's just an added layer, an added complexity to ourselves that we shouldn't have to suppress, right?
So part of the reason that I get to do what I get to do, and I used to be afraid of it, to be very honest with you, but being in a space where people know who I am and they're in the space of, oh, well, I've known you my whole life and you're a really good person. Oh, I know this girl, my sister friend, my best friend, whatever, Jillie does this, this, and this. And they're in a space of like, oh, well. And I'm like, listen, here's the deal. I'm not ever asking you to believe in anything that I do or say. I want you to go look up the Akashic records. I want you to go look up Sacred Soul Alignment. I want you to go look up Reiki. I want you to see if you're like, hey, this whole intuition thing fits for me. Or this whole thing fits for me. Or, this mediumship thing, I think you're full of shit. Or crystals don't have any metaphysical powers to them. You're full of crap. Okay.
Yeah. Be curious, be open.
Yes, 100%.
But also listen to your intuition and listen to your instinct, because it won't steer you wrong, as I knock my microphone about.
100%.
Are you open to people contacting you? And if so, what's the best way they can find out more about you and how to get a hold of you to work with you?
100%. Would love to hear from your listeners. My website is JillieMaria.com. So it's JILLIEMARIA.com. They can also find me on Facebook look up Jillie Maria, and my coaching platform will come up, as well as my public speaking page. And I would love to hear from people.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And we will definitely make sure we get those links put up when your episode airs so that people can click on it and get directly to you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Johnny John.
I appreciate you coming on. I definitely learned a lot. So
Thank you.
Again, thank you for that. To all of our listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of 3Haunted Podcast with your host. I'm John Thomas.
I am Ashley Lunar Goddess.
And if you have any questions, comments, or episode suggestions, please feel free to email us at 3hauntedpodcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't done so already, please like, follow, and subscribe to all of our social media. You don't want to miss one crazy moment.
Until next time.